Two types of people are going to see this video. Some of you have never seen my face before. I've never seen this YouTube channel or any of my YouTube channels before, and you're just interested in hearing me talk about what it's like to own and possibly collect for the Nintendo 64 in the year 2019, 2020. This is recorded at the very end of 2018, whatever. And some of you are going to be very surprised that I even own such an object in my apartment. This is my girlfriend's N64. She brought this into my life along with many things dredged up from her parents' basement. But this was part of her childhood. And what you guys, if you're a regular viewer of my channel, what you may not know about me is this was part of my early adulthood as well. The first job that I ever had as a kid that I would call a real job. The first job I had where they gave me like the tax forms to give the government, and they had that kind of paperwork, and you got your paycheck, and it was a real paycheck. The first job I had like that, you had a monthly pay stub and everything, that was as a video game journalist. So of course I was a journalist in general. No, I made the most money out of writing video game reviews. I did write other kinds of articles and other kinds of reviews. So I shouldn't just say I was only a video game journalist. It's not worth describing the whole situation. So okay, fine. I was a teenage journalist, but really, at that time, I could get like $450 for one article about video games. It was ridiculous. And even when I did a really short review, like I don't even know if is it even really a full paragraph? Like a short little box of text, that would be like $250. So anyone who is today working in games journalism or even like professional reporting journalism will be freaking out, because today, good luck making $450 doing a feature story for Rolling Stone magazine. So I was making real money out of video game journalism. Some of the other columns I wrote, look, I could digress. I did actually write some comedy columns, some current events columns. I wrote all kinds of stuff. And they paid me. So those were the days. And that was the year when the N64 came out. And I was so esteemed a video game journalist. I'm joking, but this is still literally true. I was given an N64 in advance. So this is from memory. I like my videos spontaneous, so I'm not going to Google around and confirm all the dates. What I remember is this came out first in Japan. And then they had this kind of window of time when people who were really in the know in video games had already seen it and used it, maybe because they flew to Japan or flew somewhere in Asia where it existed, and they started giving out advanced systems to journalists. And I think some of the big fancy department stores in New York City, like a few key areas, got units in advance that people got to see and test and play. And then there was a gap of time, and then it went on sale for the general public. So during that gap of time, when in theory, nobody else had the system, but it kind of seemed like everybody had it already. It kind of seemed like everyone who wanted to know it or see it or try a system had already tried it. Because I remember even the other journalists, when I had one, they were like, "Oh yeah, I tried that in New York or something." At some occasion, at some juncture, they were already familiar with it. So I was given an advance copy for review, and that was so early. Again, that was before it came out. I think at that time, technically in the United States, the only two games were Mario 64 and Wave Race 64. That was okay. My girlfriend is running off to her collection and grabbing the cartridges. So that was at the absolute dawn of this. All right, it's okay, babe. We don't need props. The type of refined and erudite, viewer and video game collector who's going to see this doesn't need to see the cartridges. But yeah, okay. So this is anyway. These are obviously not the same copies that I got for review. Anyway, so there you go. My girlfriend's childhood copy of Wave Race 64. But I think at that time there were it was really that early period where there were maybe 5 titles in existence or something, and those were like the first 2 that anyone could get their hands on. And Wave Race 64 made a big impression on people. But this is a segue to kind of the negative or critical portion of this review. Why did Wave Race 64 make such a positive impression on people? Because the graphics, everything was kind of glittering and glowing and vague. The water effect was very impressive to people, but it distracted you from the fact that the graphics were blurry. Okay? So, for me, and I wasn't the only one who felt this way, it seemed like the N64 was a big step backward. It was a big step in the wrong direction. And today, right now in 2018, Stay up to date here. We're at the end of 2018. One shop I went into, they said to me over the counter, they said right now the N64 is the single most collectible, most desirable piece of hardware. They're the most desirable games. And again, that's partly because the games are physically on cartridge, not on CD, or whether, it's relatively robust, hard to break, reliable medium. And that's what people want. They don't want CDs that get scratched. They don't want these other kinds of things. That also seemed like a step in the wrong direction, right? When this came out, Sega CD was old. Sega CD was a laughingstock. It had been around forever. And before the Sega CD, the real trailblazer was TurboGrafx CD, also known as the PC Engine CD. And again, I moved in a set of cosmopolitan people. What was coming out in Japan, we knew about in Toronto. And this is all, I can't even say pre-internet. I'm sure the internet existed for some people and some, but it wasn't really mainstream. But people were just flying back and forth to Hong Kong or Taiwan or Japan. They all had contact with the Japanese systems. PC Engine CD, when that came out, wow, big impact. The Laserdisc systems, none of you guys will remember that. Wow, big. I remember the Laserdisc systems. People were so excited. They showed them as a museum exhibit. They had video games playing on Laserdisc. So my girlfriend, do you even remember? Do you know what Laserdisc is? Laserdisc is a CD the size of a vinyl LP. You don't even know Laserdisc. Wow. Okay. So Laserdisc, that's exactly what it is. It is simply a CD or CD-ROM, but it is as big as a vinyl LP. So the amount of data that can be on it is enormous. And, when you put it on, it's that whole thing, it starts up. So there were Laserdisc-based video games and systems. And again, people were, like, when that happened, people were really kind of jejune. They were just excited and stuff. Okay, so this comes out. People want it today. It's hyper desirable today because of the cartridge. But at that time, cartridge is a step in the wrong direction. Okay, wow. For half a second, Wave Race 64 looks real impressive. Everything's glowing and glittering, and you don't notice how blurry the graphics are. The blurriness, a big step in the wrong direction. I had, as a child, the Model 1 Sega Genesis with the high-definition graphics label on. If you guys don't know this, the different iterations of the Sega Genesis that came out, the video quality was not the same. So I didn't know as a child, but I was lucky. I got a really crisp signal from my Sega Genesis. And when you were pretty much any game other than Wave Race 64, even if you're just trying to read text on screen in Mario, it's pathetic. It's like the camera has been covered with, I don't know, gauze or Vaseline or something. Everything's diaphanous. Everything's vague. And today, this makes it even worse because when you put this, I've seen this now. We have plugged this in. So I got this girlfriend. We were together for more than a year or something before this happens. We go to her parents' basement. We get her video games out of the basement. She moves in with me here in Canada. We'd already lived together in China. We move from, we get the N64, plug it in to an HDMI high definition. It's terrible. And it is. I mean, obviously, this was tooled. This was engineered for an old-fashioned cathode ray tube monitor. And I said to her, honestly, I was just sitting down with her so she could have some kind of, nostalgic return to her childhood with this. And I said to her something I remember reading in a review of the original black and white Game Boy. And I say black and white advisedly because it was green and gray. I remember a review that said, this fundamentally cannot be a successful video game system because it hurts your eyes to play it. Now, that review, of course, was hilariously wrong. The original green and gray Game Boy, I think it still holds a record. It's one of the most successful video game systems of all time. Play it for 30 minutes even, and it hurts your eyes. Don't play it at all. Don't play the original hardware. It's ridiculous. And today, in 2018, 2019, 2020, original hardware for N64 running on a current model flat screen TV is pretty much unplayable because it hurts your eyes to look at it. Okay? So, I'm sorry, again, I didn't want to Google this. I don't want to ruin the spontaneity. When N64 came out, Sega Saturn was already out. That's what I remember. I had them both. Sega was in a really weird financial position. They didn't loan me. The Nintendo stuff was all loan. The company loaned it to me and then wanted it back. Sega, everything was a gift. So they gave me, everything. Maybe I'm misremembering, but Sega, they really rolled out the red carpet. They took me to Sega City. I played, yeah. So Sega City was like it was a different time, and I got to play the video games that came out before. You see, you didn't know I was a video game journalist. You don't know this about me. They had these kiosks set up, and they had like 8 different games that hadn't been released to the public yet for, Sega Saturn at that time. Sega Saturn, the video was crisp. It actually had multiple video modes. It could do kind of high resolution and low or medium resolution for different games. They'd switch it up. But it from my perspective, it gave a crisp, clear signal at every resolution it did. It was just fundamentally competent as a system. Nobody wants it today. Nobody wants to collect scratched up CD-ROMs. And I think the whole world is waiting. It looks like Sega is now going to put out a retro console to make the Saturn games available, but whatever, we'll see. But it's not that great a library. It's not that important. So the N64 right now, the end of 2018, the writing is on the wall. The expectation is there. Nintendo first brought out the NES Classic or the NES Mini. People call it both. They reissued that. Then they brought out the Super Nintendo, the SNES Classic, also known as the SNES Mini. What's next? Everyone is counting down to the N64 Classic or the N64 Mini coming out. The problem is, what nobody expects them to do is bring out a reissued Classic system with a cartridge slot. So kind of a dead end. So you, the audience, but also you, my girlfriend, who have a collection of N64 cartridges, would you really want a reissued system where you can't use the cartridges? Because of the whole strength of this today. So, babe, why don't you grab for me the Nintendo Wii controller and one of the N64 controllers, just so I can turn it. Because this is the other thing I wanted to mention. So at that time, thanks, babe. No big deal. This doesn't look perfect. At that time, the Saturn had an award-winning controller that still to this day, some people say was the greatest video game controller of all time. Okay, so I think it was technically the Saturn Model 2 controller. The Model 1 one was excellent too, and people loved it. But it's a simple, straightforward controller. And this, people really got excited with this. It's wacky, it's asymmetrical. You hold it and then use it in asymmetrical fashion. You hold it here in the middle. Has this. Oh yeah, and so yours is all plastic. My review copy, the shaft and the joystick was steel. So I noticed that. So this must be a Model 2. Did you have one with steel ever or no?
I seem to remember
Yeah.
using it at another person's house. But
And that was out there. This is all plastic, but I remember a steel shaft and steel ball. Anyway, whatever. They probably work exactly the same. Probably maybe the steel rusts or something. Maybe there was some problem. But I was just going to say, at that time, the Street Fighter games were still a big, big deal. And Nintendo tried to have their cake and eat it too here by having these 6 buttons, so it'd be possible to do the Street Fighter layout. But Capcom ended up really backing Sega, and it was on the Saturn that all the Capcom games came out, and they came out close to arcade perfect. So Nintendo missed the boat on that. The controller is still, in my opinion, fundamentally a joy and a delight. So this system, in every other respect aside from the controller, was a huge step backwards. It was a step in the wrong direction, right? And another thing, we won't even get into it here. If you guys don't know about this, they did this scam with the memory expansion card. You guys, the jump pack versus the expansion pack. You look at it, was like, oh my god, this is like going back to the bad old days of TurboGrafx 16 with like rip-off RAM expansion packs. So in a lot of ways, it was a step backwards. And at the same time, right, Sega Saturn, you could at least play audio CDs. But you could also play video CDs, not DVDs yet. And everyone knew that was the killer app, was having multiple legit uses for it. And internet connectivity and that stuff was coming along. You couldn't really do much in internet connectivity, but it existed. You could play Phantasy Star Online or some crap if you really wanted to throw a lot of money at these systems. But this was, in many ways, the kind of masterpiece of the system. It's wacky, it's surreal, it's original. Still to this day, this is what you can't reproduce. So a lot of the software from the N64 you can play on some other system. Right, and this is what I want to say. Sorry. I was mentioning, so Wave Race 64 comes out. This is a memory. You had to live through it at that time, or you had to be a games journalist at the time, okay? These are the launch titles, right? Mario 64 comes out, and then when this was really news, when people really talked about this, the very first Zelda game, for N64. It doesn't matter which. I forget whether it was Ocarina of Time. You got it? Okay. Do you want to get it? Okay. When the first Zelda game came out for N64, okay, there we go. So Ocarina of Time. When the Zelda game, you got your name. That's cool. Written on from childhood. She's got her name written on the cartridge. So the very first Zelda game comes out for N64. And you know what the scandal was? You could run the game better on a PC, on a personal computer. You could run it better on a Windows system than you could on N64. So for whatever reason, it wasn't when Mario 64 came out that really hit people. I don't know why. Maybe just the style of the game. Mario 64 people didn't really care. But then when this came out, people, including games journalists, were playing it not on N64 hardware. They were playing it on PCs. They were playing it on a PC emulator of some kind. They were taking screenshots and uploading it and saying, hey, look, the graphics are crisper and cleaner, and it renders better, and you can see objects in the distance better, and you can read the text better. Maybe that was what it was. I don't remember anyone saying that. But you have to read text on screen for this, right? Reading text on screen for the N64 is horrible. This is like worse than Atari. Okay, maybe that's all right. Going back to Atari 2600, this is really terrible. Going back to Commodore 64, I remember reading text on screen with Commodore 64. That was pretty awful. So for whatever reason, when this came out, and that just was like the nail in the coffin for so many people, where it was like, hey, guess what? N64 is way too expensive for what it is. The video quality sucks. The hardware was already obsolete on day one when it came out. And at that time, their competition wasn't just Sega Saturn. It was also PCs. It was also personal computers. Personal computers were still bringing out big box games, making a lot of money, selling games on CDs and other format. Really, at that time, it was games on CDs. CD-ROM format for PC. So they had competition from there. And that, you could feel it. You could just feel the excitement and optimism drain out of it, right? But, so still today you have the option of doing this. Of course, you could play this game, Zelda or Mario 64, on some other platform, right? And I know Mario 64, specifically, this was reissued on Game Boy Advance, or 2DS, or 3DS, or all of them. Yeah, it was reissued on one of the, 3DS something. It's been reissued, But if you play any of the reissues, what you lose is exactly the wonky, imperfect brilliance of the controller. And if people tell me the GameCube controller is even better, it's fundamentally similar. That this and the GameCube controller are similar. But I mean, this, love it or hate it, this and the GameCube controller, that's really the zenith of Nintendo controllers. Because guess what? Guess what comes next? This monstrosity. This is the pathetic anticlimax to 25 years of video game development. Talk about a step in the wrong direction. I'm sorry. So this had to compete with the Sega Saturn, controller that, as I mentioned, won awards and people absolutely loved, and they still love to this day, right? Like, what are they thinking?
That's competing with PlayStation.
Right. So this is my point. This controller, you'll never really get the same experience playing an N64 game on a computer in emulation or on a Nintendo 3DS or a portable platform or anything else that it might be adapted to play on in future, some other hardware, okay? And this is the exact opposite. Any game you have on the Wii, you would be better playing with a keyboard. You'd be better playing with any other joystick or format. It's so awful. It's such a terrible step in the wrong direction as console. And all the finicky crap with getting the wireless to work and getting it synced up and all this crap is terrible. And I know this because I have a child. I have a 5-year-old daughter. I put up with all this video game crap in my life because, I know. So my girlfriend is pointing at you can't. But how many games does this even work with? And it's still not better. My opinion. I don't think this is good. This is the Wii Pro or whatever. Good luck, And if some games work with it and some games don't, and you still have to deal with all the finicky wireless crap or what have you. So yeah, that's it. I mean, guys, look. Why do people play video games? For me, as an adult, either I'm playing video games with my daughter, or like I might be interested in a video game for the length of time it takes to do a bowel movement. My level of patience, I mean, sorry, but these games people consider great classics. Like, 40 hours of gameplay. Yeah? Really, homeboy? You got 40 hours? I got a lot of better things I could do with 40 hours of my life. You know what I'm saying? It blows my mind a little bit that people put 40 hours into a game as an adult, et cetera, et cetera. But it's for this reason, both of these reasons, that people are really more interested than ever in classic systems and retro gaming, because it fulfills the two things. One, a lot of software that's great for kids. And I'm a parent. I do not see a lot of software that's great for kids on current generation systems. And it's so much money. Do you want to spend hundreds and hundreds of dollars on a Nintendo Switch or a PS4 or an Xbox One for just a couple of games that are kind of child safe and child friendly? And, those systems are aimed at core gamers. Mm-hmm. Nintendo Switch, you could do a separate video on, but it's finicky, it's fragile. Your kid can't spill orange juice on it. The actual controller sliding thing. Switch is really a non-starter. My daughter already broke a Nintendo 2DS. So they're not invincible. And I could probably throw this on the floor now, and it's not going to change. Even the ports for the controller are really rugged and so on. This is kid-friendly hardware, and it's kid-friendly software. There's pretty much every game is going to be good for kids. And then on the other hand, if you're actually an adult, so what do we actually have in the slot here? We have Road Rash 64. That's a solid 5 minutes of gameplay, right? That's a solid, that's about the time it takes to have a bowel movement. This is not going to compete with reading Thomas Hobbes' Leviathan. This is not going to compete with reading books or Substance or what have you. But this is something, so with retro gaming, I think you have both. And here's the funny thing. The market for that, potentially and actually, is larger than the market for core gamers. Parents, casual gamers, etc. It's a huge number of people. And the real competition in 2018 and 2019 is with playing video games on your phone or tablet, which I personally am not interested in. I don't really think I'm interested in this. But the question is now, can someone put together a classic reissue console like we had for the Sega Genesis recently? Deeply flawed console. Leave a comment below the video. I can do another video. We can do a comparative head-to-head review. The classic Genesis reissue and the classic Super Nintendo reissue. We got it all. I'll give a link to my main channel too. If some of you guys are watching this as video game players who wonder who is this crazy guy with a 5-year-old daughter making these videos. But yeah, as a library of games and just as an interface, as a controller, and as a refreshing contrast to the garbage that Nintendo became soon thereafter, in my biased opinion, and specifically for titles like Ocarina of Time, there's a lot of demand, and everyone's saying, yeah, people pay large amounts of money, people are trying to collect, people are trying to buy up the legacy of the N64. So you tell me, 2019, 2020, is this the year of the N64 Classic, of the N64 Mini? And if so, would you buy it for yourself? Would you buy it for your son, daughter, grandson, or granddaughter? If you want a system that's certainly pornography-free, child-friendly, intuitive, easy to use, and nearly indestructible, I think you can throw this on the ground a lot harder than you can throw a 3DS or throw a Nintendo Switch. The whole, your kid drops the Nintendo Switch on the ground. It's kind of a no-brainer. But ultimately, don't play video games that hurt your eyes. For me, right now, hooking up to a current flat screen, not even for 5 minutes.